Welcome to Hope Talks podcast with Grayson Willis and Pastor Margaret Michael, where you'll hear inspiring stories that are filled with hope and good news in Jesus Christ. You can also search for our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and TuneIn. We would love your feedback and invite you to take a short, anonymous survey. You can find the link to the survey in the show notes.
Welcome to today's broadcast of Hope Talks. I'm Grayson Willis.
And I'm Pastor Margaret Michael.
And we're so glad that you've joined us for Hope Talks today. And today we're joined by Andy Scoles. Andy, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing great, Grayson. How are you?
Good. It's great to have you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so today Andy is joining us from Lynchburg, Virginia, and is going to share his testimony. I learned to know Andy sitting in a credentials interview on the district as Andy was doing his annual interview for the credential process here in the Church of the Nazarene. And so, yeah, Andy and I we hit it off. And so after some conversation, here we are. So we're excited today, Andy, to hear what God has done and is doing in your life. And I will let you tell the rest of your story.
What we like to start out is just asking people, tell us about where you're from and about how you grew up.
All right. Well, I was born and raised in Lynchburg, Virginia. That's where I live currently. Raised in the Church of the Nazarene as well. My parents were members of what was then called Lynchburg First Church of the Nazarene, and now called Compassion Church of the Nazarene. And that was back in 1994, and they were members before I was even born. So I was raised there, brought up there, and there are people there still who knew me when I was a baby. So it's a pretty good experience to be able to go to the same church I did as a child, and also now be able to serve there and be a leader there, and just know all these people. And I feel like it's not a story that a lot of people have these days, but I'm grateful that it is my story. So yeah, I live here in Lynchburg, and as Pastor Margaret said, I am currently pursuing pastoral ministry, learning through the Church of the Nazarene, and that was my first interview for my district license. And this story that I'll be telling has definitely led me to the point of wanting to be in ministry in this context. So.
Yeah, when God has met us in our places of pain and brought healing and hope in our lives, we want to share that with others. And so just maybe start out by telling us where your story as a teenager, as a child. So yeah, wherever you want to jump in, and just maybe memories from the church, growing up, impactful, foundational moments. Yeah,
sure. So, I grew up in kids programs and in youth programs. I was kind of a pastor's kid, even though my parents were pastors. I was a church kid, basically, a quintessential church kid. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it means that I had extensive education in the Bible from day one. I went to events through the church, went to concerts, went to youth events, winter retreats, summer camps, that sort of thing. And my childhood was kind of like a lot of other church kids. But I guess things really started to get serious when I graduated from college and came back and started pursuing different forms of leadership. So I had a lot of people who were very influential in my life from my church, lots of different pastors, lots of different people, family, friends, and also a family that was incredibly stable and incredibly supportive, had a great example of not just a Christian family, but also the family of God helping raise me from day one. So I had a solid foundation there, which I'll also get into in my testimony.
Yeah. You mentioned, after college, getting into ministry then, but even if there's anything that you want to reflect back on from your childhood or teen years, or even college years, that you would like to share that led into that?
Yeah, so I've always had a passion for people, and for stories, and for knowledge of Jesus. So all those things combined pretty well to lead into ministry. In college, I guess, is where I first started really trying to bear other people's burdens. I didn't really have a whole lot of, I did have some personal issues when I was a teenager and everything. I was bullied and didn't really fit in with other people. And it sort of continued into college, but college is also where I found a lot of great Christian community, but also a lot of people who were struggling. That was where I first really experienced relationships with people who had mental illness or who came from broken families or who were going through addiction or cycles of family brokenness or whatever. And that's where I first sort of started getting a heart for those people. Because I think the Lord was working on that in me from day one, just putting my story together. But also, I think He wanted me to be able to relate to other people when they're going through hard times, which is definitely helpful for the ministry context.
Yeah. So if you want to just start in on your testimony, whatever you'd like to share with us today.
All right, sounds good. Fear is a liar, but it has been one of my greatest enemies and obstacles in life. In the past, I have primarily been afraid of any kind of change or the pain that such change might bring, and therefore my journey of recovery has been a long one. For those who use the Enneagram as a personal growth tool, I am a Type 9, and the Type 9's greatest fear is that they may lose or be separated from others. They fear losing their sense of peace, both within themselves and outside in their environment, and they quest to avoid or overcome anything that might disrupt that peace. But making peace usually requires first going through conflict and growth. Fortunately, God has been gracious and patient in my life and has empowered me to overcome my fearful tendencies and push through hard times to achieve victory. By His power, I can overcome my hurts, hang-ups, habits, and sins. Hi, my name is Andy, and I'm a faithful follower of Jesus who struggles with and celebrates recovery over pornography, lust, codependency, anxiety, grief, selfishness, covetous, perfectionism, and a whole host of other stuff. If you hear nothing else I say, hear this. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what your struggle is. We're all broken and in need of a Savior. And in that way, each of our stories is alike and tied into the greater Christian story, each of them authored by the Lord. Even if you can't relate to my story personally, perhaps you can relate to the rhythms of grace that God has left in it. And hopefully you can also relate to the hope and the redemptive power that He provides and displays. So I was born in Lynchburg, Virginia in 1994. My early life was really good. I was born into a Christian home with a mom and a dad who loved each other, and my older sister, my older brother, and me, and did their best to provide for us. I was the baby of the family, and I knew it. My needs were cared for, and we lived a fairly comfortable life. The Passion Church of the Nazarene, or as it used to be called, Lynchburg First Church of the Nazarene, is where I was raised. And anytime the doors were open, you could probably find me or some member of my family present. My early life was filled with typical kid things like school, sports, piano lessons, church activities, Boy Scouts, playing outside, plenty of other stuff. We ate dinner together as a family around the table most nights, and I knew that my parents loved me and were there for me. My dad would take me into his and my mom's bedroom every night and read to me stories like The Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings, a bunch of other classics like that, and then read the Bible with me and pray with me. In doing so, my dad helped me construct a foundation of faith up until the time I entered middle school. My mom was a homemaker, and on the average day when I got home from school, I could find her doing some sort of housework or sitting in the living room working on a project. But I'm not going to spend much time on this because I don't want to be tempted to see my past through rose-colored glasses. There were definitely issues during that time that I'm still trying to work through today as an adult. So while no one's upbringing is perfect, mine was actually still pretty good for the most part, especially as I discovered when I entered college and knew other people's family situations were. I made a decision to follow Jesus at such a young age that I don't remember the first time I said yes to Him. I accepted the truth of the gospel several times before I truly understood what it meant, and I was baptized around the age of 7 or 8. The only way I could have been more of a church kid is if I had been a pastor's kid. Mm-hmm. If there's one thing I can definitely say was true about my family growing up, it's that there was a heavy emphasis on intelligence, critical thinking, creativity, and being productive. My dad was a nuclear engineer, and my mom's background was in journalism and writing, so I guess that kind of makes sense. But this was and is true of the rest of my family as well, both on my mom's side and my dad's side. So I grew up under the unspoken expectation that I would work hard to learn and apply knowledge. Slacking off from education wasn't an option or even a thought in my mind. I was a bookworm from day one, and most of the time I liked the fact that I was smart. It made things a little bit easier. It was a thing I had going for me since I wasn't super athletic or knowledgeable of the world as a child. This, in part, is what led me to be trapped for a long time, and even still somewhat today, in perfectionism. Perfectionism, the enemy of progress, to quote Winston Churchill. Or, as I've said a lot recently, perfect is the enemy of good. Unfortunately, at that time I also lived under a rock. I grew up oblivious to the ways of the world because of how my parents sheltered me. Their parenting both helped and harmed me because of this. I grew up without cable TV and most video games and didn't get high-speed internet until high school in 2009. We had dial-up internet most of my childhood. My parents hardly ever or fought or raised their voices, and they displayed their affection in front of us on a regular basis. It was an atmosphere of stability that unfortunately didn't do much to teach me how to deal with the stresses of the real world. Because the peace in my home hardly broke, I wasn't prepared to handle most forms of conflict, though I am grateful for the stability that I was provided. Predictably, living like this also made it difficult to fit in at school. I didn't understand or empathize with other kids, and I was definitely a teacher's pet, and so I was bullied. Not often physically, thank God, but words stung. I really want to slap whoever first said, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." There's a reason why James chapter 3, verse 5 says, "So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how a small fire sets ablaze a large forest. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among our members. It stains the whole body, sets the course of life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Every kind of animal, bird, reptile, and fish and has been tamed by humankind. But no one can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way." Other kids' words tore at my self-confidence, and words still hurt today, especially in a world as divided as ours currently is, and especially if you look too hard at a Facebook or YouTube comment section. I was never truly able to defend myself because I didn't know how to properly process my anger, and I didn't want to get in trouble for a fight, nor would I have been able to fight because I was always a small and physically weak kid. I hated the idea of turning the other cheek and ignoring bullies because it made me angry, and I didn't know what to do with that anger besides bury it or retaliate verbally, although that never worked. This type of bullying lasted all the way through middle school and somewhat into high school. I had a few good friends, but a lot of people were stuck in their own worlds and didn't have time for me, and I often didn't understand the types of things they talked about. I also didn't get the talk until I was in 9th grade biology, and the class started learning about the science of reproduction. My talk consisted of my mom sitting me down and mechanically and somewhat awkwardly telling me the science of it all without going much into the emotional and spiritual side of it. All I knew is that it was something I was supposed to stay away from until marriage. My parents had always told us to ask them if we had questions about this sort of thing, but I never really felt comfortable doing that because it was such a taboo topic, especially in the purity culture I grew up in. At that stage of life, I wasn't mature enough to understand sex anyway, and girls weren't exactly fawning over me either. The two things I had going for me in any social situation was that I was both a nice kid and a smart kid. This was also the beginning of me feeling like an outsider in popular groups of people my age, a struggle that still somewhat exists today. I've always related more to people who are older than me. After all, being a nerd or a geek wasn't quite popular or mainstream yet when I was in grade school. The end of high school came, and I decided to attend Longwood University and study English and creative writing. I'd taken after my mom in terms of a lot of my interests, and one of my childhood dreams was and still is to become an author. Things began to change as I finished high school and entered college. It was like on my 18th birthday, God finally decided to press my activate puberty button. So I got to go through puberty in college. Yay. I was 5'4" when I graduated high school, and I looked like I was 12 years old. I actually got asked a few times if I was a child prodigy, which was kind of awkward. By the time I graduated college, I was 5'10", and I'm now 6 foot tall, which was a big change. Needless to say, going through puberty in a small liberal arts college was the first thing that really tested my faith. That was also the time that I unfortunately discovered pornography. Armed with my first college laptop and a speedy internet connection, I went looking for answers to all the questions I had about sex and relationships and romantic love, but in all the wrong places. My conscience told me that what I was doing was wrong, but my raging hormones got the better of me, and I got hooked on porn. And so the destructive cycle of guilt, shame, and addiction began. However, God was just getting started with his work in my life. During my freshman year, I started attending the Baptist Collegiate Ministries organization on Longwood's campus and made my first real college friends. Over the next 4 years, my eyes were opened to the true nature of the world, along with the nature of God and his holiness. I had a lot of amazing opportunities to learn, serve, and grow, along with succeeding in my college studies. By my junior year, though, 2 full years of porn use weighed heavily on my mind and spirit. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I didn't know how to admit it, or who to admit it to, or even how to stop. Shame held me tightly in its clutches, and it was a long time before I would really understand the difference between shame and guilt. I thought I was alone in this struggle. It ate me up. It kept me from pursuing dating relationships because I never learned the right way to approach that type of situation, and I was terrified of rejection of any kind. Also, think about how a 13-year-old boy crushes on and asks out a girl. That's how I was back then, super awkward and awful. I ended up staying away from dating for the entirety of my college career. Finally, in the spring of my junior year, I mustered up the courage to find 2 male friends in my BCM group to admit my struggle to. I remember sweating heavily as my heart pounded and the words tumbled out of my mouth like rocks. I have a porn addiction. I braced myself. I was expecting, well, I'm not sure what I was expecting, but not this. I was surprised by, dude, I'm so sorry to hear that. So do I. The weight of the world came off my shoulders and I felt seen. It was amazing. Little did I know I was entering step 1 of recovery. We admitted we were powerless against our addictions and compulsive behaviors and that our lives had become unmanageable. I also began to have frank and sensitive conversations with friends about tough topics like mental health that are undoubtedly part of what led me to get involved in the recovery ministry. But that was just the start. My desire for porn didn't stop there, and 20-year-old me had no idea what was in store for the next 8 years. I graduated college in 2016 and got a job at a Christian bookstore in Lynchburg and at a small comic book store in the Lynchburg Mall. I hadn't intended to work retail right out of college, but that's life. In March 2017, less than a year after I graduated college, my mom was diagnosed with liver cancer. I was devastated. She was only 61. Treatments were scheduled. My dad took time off work to help. I was the only kid living at home at that point, as my older siblings had all been death, but I watched firsthand as cancer ravaged my mom's body. It was an aggressive disease. In just a few short months, the tumor had grown and caused her body to look like she was 9 months pregnant. The chemo was not working. I prayed and prayed for mercy and for God to save her. On July 26, 2017, my dad and I woke to find my mom unresponsive, alive and breathing, but unable to communicate or wake up from a state of delirium. We took her to the hospital and found out that she was in toxic shock from the tumor rupturing the lining of her stomach. She died that afternoon. We were surrounded by family and friends, but my world was falling to pieces around me, and my heart felt like it had been yanked out and run over by a steamroller. I had just lost one of the most important relationships in my life, and I was gutted. My fear of losing relationships was realized, and not for the first or last time. I didn't know how to properly process my anger and grief at the time either, so I avoided thinking about it, or I cried out to the Lord for help. I'd had a relative die before, my Nana, my dad's mom, before I graduated high school, but that didn't have the same effect on me that my mom's death did. Despite having so much support surrounding my family and me, I felt so alone, and I spent the next year afraid of dying young like my mom. Despite all of my best attempts to quit, my porn use continued. It was a salve to all the pain and anger and sadness I was experiencing. I did, however, decide to memorize Psalm 46, my mom's favorite psalm, and meditating on it during hard times has helped me in recent years. My favorite part is verses 8 through 11. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots of fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. In the fall of 2017, I finally confessed to the lead pastor of Compassion Church that I was broken and addicted. He was one of the first people I told about this in my hometown, besides my parents, who unfortunately didn't really understand and didn't really have any support to offer me. My pastor advised me to start attending the church's recovery program, which was called Livestream Recovery. I hadn't wanted to before because I didn't think I was one of those people. Turns out I was, and I am, and I look better now and happier now for that realization. And honestly, more people are those people than we like to admit. That's just denial, I think, speaking. As I've told several people recently, people in recovery are some of the best people to know because they've been humbled by life, made compassionate by God, and are stronger in spirit after having to overcome so much stuff. I started attending the recovery program, and I met with other people also in recovery. I felt at home with them, like I was no longer alone, and like I finally belonged after a whole life of never feeling like I truly belonged anywhere, or like I was an outsider. Because I've even felt like an outsider in church sometimes, despite being raised in it. In spring of 2018, the leader of that recovery group approached me and asked me if I would like to help start a Celebrate Recovery group that would replace Livestream Recovery. I wholeheartedly said yes, and spent the next several months preparing by meeting with the initial launch team and starting to train for the leadership process. The Celebrate Recovery curriculum forced me to begin taking a closer look at my hurts, hang-ups, and habits. I slowly but surely came to understand my issues and the roots of them, and I began seeking out accountability and figuring out how to overcome all of my fear and anxiety. It wasn't easy, and those were a rough several years for my recovery, especially because by mid-2019, both of the retail stores I worked at had closed, and I was forced to find a new job. Fortunately, I was able to take my writing and communication skills to a marketing company in my hometown and begin learning about online content creation. It was a great experience, and I began learning a lot of useful things that I'm sure will be helpful for ministry in the future. In November 2019, just before Thanksgiving, my two grandfathers died within a week of each other, and I felt the stabbing pain of grief once again. The still semi-fresh wound of my mom's death reopened, and my emotions and spirit took a blow as I tried to process the grief as best I could. Given how I was raised, I still wasn't the best at dealing with my emotions. At that point, I'd also started seeing a Christian counselor, so I slowly began to work through some of the things that were most affecting me, like my anxiety and my people-pleasing tendencies. Around this time, I also gained my first stable accountability partner. We were able to be truly vulnerable with each other with nothing held back and no conflict of personality, which gave me another breath of fresh air as I worked my recovery. And then COVID happened. The whole company I worked for, which at the time consisted of 12 people, was told to go home and work remotely. That was actually an exciting experience, though it wasn't the best for me in terms of personal discipline and routine. I ended up moving out of my dad's house in May 2020 and moving into an apartment with a roommate. I worked in my bedroom, at my desk, and sometimes even in bed, which was fun sometimes. Being home all the time, however, made it difficult to quit porn, and I started seeking out Christian resources on recovery, on healthy, godly sexuality that began to help me completely reframe my view of what sex is and what God intends for it. By this time, there were also other family issues that I had to learn how to deal with. Each member of my family dealt with my mom and two grandfathers' deaths in their own way, and we supported each other. But my family has always been good at thinking and being smart and stoic, and not so good at helping each other emotionally, which for me means that I'm often stuck in my own head. Thank God that has begun to change. So it probably comes as no surprise that I didn't take well the fact that my dad started dating another woman about a year after my mom died. She was someone he had known in college and reconnected with after my mom's death. Her husband had also died years ago, so they had that in common. He lived in Florida at the time, and my dad had just retired, so he would travel to see her once a month. It didn't feel so good to have him gone so often. In 2020, they decided they were going to get married, and I really didn't know what to do with that. I was both disturbed and happy for them. They bought a house, and she moved up here and into it, while my dad worked on getting my childhood home ready to sell so he could move into it with her once they were married. It wasn't until after they got married in early 2021 that I was finally able to talk to them directly about it and start figuring out our new family dynamic. My sister also got married in 2021, so I gained a new brother-in-law. I'm happy to say that my family's new normal has mostly evened now, though it took a lot of work and acceptance and forgiveness. 2021 was also another big year of change for me. In the fall of 2020, the company I worked for had gone through some personnel loss due to people quitting or getting fired, and it started becoming an unhealthy place for me to work. I began questioning my own professional abilities as my boss's perception of the quality of my work declined, despite the fact that I was given no real or concrete opportunities to learn how to improve. It bugged the crap out of me, and the problem continued into 2021. At the beginning of 2021, I began seeing a different counselor after not feeling like I was getting the treatment I needed from my first counselor. The difference was night and day. My new counselor, who I still see every month, gave me things that I had been sorely lacking in many ways: personalized encouragement, affirmation of my value as a person, assistance with properly processing my emotions and my fears and my thoughts, and the ability to truly see myself as Jesus does. It's like he was able to crawl inside my head and help me start pulling apart all of the tangled knots of fear and resentment, self-confidence issues, and the codependency that had built up over time like a suffocating net. He helped me face the shadow monsters in my spirit and mind, and still does to this day. I can confidently say that because of him, the CR program, and my network of accountability, I'm not the same person today that I was even a year or 2 or even 3 years ago. A few other things happened in 2021. In June, my dad finally sold my childhood home, and I experienced a different kind of mourning for the place where I grew up. In September, though, I was able to buy a house with my own, and I also entered my first ever romantic relationship. And then in December 2021, my world was turned upside down again as I lost my job and my girlfriend and I broke up. I found myself sitting at home wondering what the heck was going to happen next. Things were crazy. God had blessed me financially in that I could afford to be unemployed for a couple of months while I searched for a job. But the 2 months I spent unemployed gave me a new sense of clarity about life that would be too long of an explanation to put into this testimony. Suffice to say, God managed to break another big hole in the wall that I'd unintentionally built between him and me over the years. I started thinking a lot more about surrender and what that looked like, and about holiness. I got a new job that I love at Liberty University, fortunately, in February of 2022. And now I'm pursuing ordination through the Church of the Nazarene and even working towards a master's in information technology at Liberty. I want others to experience the victory, grace, and love that I've experienced through Jesus. And my goal is to use media and internet communication in various forms to do so. Also, these days, I embrace the discomfort of change and learning new things because I know that the only way to grow is to accept the challenges ahead of me as they are and push through by the power of the Holy Spirit. The Lord has done such a work in my spirit that I've genuinely been able to break free from addiction and compulsive behaviors and my other hurts, hang-ups, and habits when I never could before. So for anyone who's struggling with sexual sin you've committed or that has been committed against you, and I say this to both the men and the women out there is hope. You too can also experience freedom from sexual hurt or addiction, and from all the other things, from codependency and perfectionism, anxiety and depression. God is able. It is possible. He has the power to do it. I'm also experiencing freedom from people-pleasing, anxiety, and perfectionism because I know that the only person whose opinion truly matters is God, and he wants to use me in ways that I never expected. Recovery is not a one-time thing. It's an extended long-term process that requires you to face the things that hold you back and keep you in bondage. So run into the arms of Jesus. If you do, and you really work recovery and seek after God, you'll find peace, healing, and victory like you may not have experienced before. Get involved in your church. Serve where you can. Be a leader as the Lord calls you to. To give of yourself for the sake of others is one of the most rewarding things you can do, and it will help you see beyond yourself. I'll finish with Psalm 1, which says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. I want to be a man who delights in the Lord and is like a tree planted and fed by streams of living water." The only way to do that successfully, though, is to abide in Christ, surrender all things to Him, and pursue holiness. It's not easy, and I definitely have a lot to work on, but it's definitely worth it, and recognizing the things in this life that are worth fighting for and the things in life that are worth fighting against has also helped me continue to overcome my hurts, habits, and hang-ups. So thank you for letting me share.
Wow. Thank you, Andy. That was a beautiful picture of God's transforming grace in your life, and you being willing, right, to go on that journey and to say, "Here I am, Lord," and surrender. If someone was listening today, and recently at our church we had a panel on a Sunday morning on anxiety, and I just think about if someone's listening today that is dealing with some of the things that you struggle with. I know even anxiety was a part of your story. What would you say today to someone who's like, "Man, that just touched my heart. Like, I know these are some things that I need to work on." What would you say to those people specifically? What are some steps that people can take to begin that journey of healing?
Yeah, sure. Well, there are a few. First thing I would say is just admit to them first. Being able to admit to your own hurts, your own hang-ups and habits, and being able to do so to somebody else who's safe. That's the beginning station of this. That's how it all starts. Because you can't solve a problem, but you're not going to admit it's there. Yeah. So that's the first step. But also, I would just say, be willing to surrender and do whatever it takes to overcome the issue. If it's anxiety or depression, it could be medicine or getting counseling or finding accountability. Honestly, any of these tools will help pretty much anyone. It's kind of a universal thing. But I'd just say, get started. It's never too late to start recovering from stuff. It's never too late to admit to a problem or confess a sin. And there's always hope, because Jesus died for our sins so that we could have this freedom and this power to overcome by the Holy Spirit. So just be willing to do the work. It's hard, but you have to decide that it is so much better in the long run to do the work than it is to stay where you are. Because staying where you are stagnates you.
Yes.
And it keeps you trapped. So it's better to just rip off the bandage, so to speak, and disinfect the wound. Just get started, and it's going to be hard. It might get worse before it gets better. You're probably going to go back to old habits at certain points, but just remember, there's always forgiveness. Right. God does not run out of chances to forgive us. Right. He does not run out of mercy. He does not run out of grace. It's always there. And the church is there to help you as well. If the church is doing its job, it's helping needy people.
That's right.
Who are hurting.
Yeah.
So.
Andy, I was just going to say, what a powerful testimony, how God helped you with your struggles once you admitted them and seeked out community like you were talking about, admitted it to somebody else, and also a powerful testimony about how He helped you and your family through the loss of your mom in that difficult time. And so thank you for sharing that with us today, and also great advice that you gave there on how, if you're struggling with something, how to bring it to the light, so to speak, and let God bring healing in that situation.
Amen.
Yeah, I'm thinking about for people that are listening and go, well, what is Celebrate Recovery? And it is a 12-step Christ-centered program. And I think about when people come in that first time, and this even happened really recently, it's hard to walk in that first time because you don't know what to expect. But we have to understand when we're in recovery and we're willing to say that we have, that we need this, we come out of that denial, we have to understand that the other people there are also in recovery and they have understanding. And it's not a judgmental thing. It's a welcome, we're glad you're here, and we're grateful that you're trusting us to walk with you on this journey. And I know that that was you one day, that was you that walked in. Is that newcomer, and now you help lead there at the Celebrate Recovery at Compassion Church in Lynchburg. So thank you for what you're doing, that you didn't just find healing, but you have chosen to give your life to ministry to help others find healing and wholeness and holiness. So thank you for sharing today, and just thank you for giving back.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us, Andy, and thank you for listening to today's broadcast of Hope Talks. We pray that as Andy Scoles has shared his testimony today, that it truly has been a half hour of hope for your life. May God bless.
Hope Talks is sponsored by Church of the Nazarene Harrisonburg in partnership with Sunshine Ministries.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast of Hope Talks. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe for updates and the latest episodes. Also, if you're in the Harrisonburg-Rockingham County area, we invite you to listen on the radio each Sunday at noon on 1470 AM or 102.1 FM WBTX.